This is the community budget forum on the draft 23-24 Walton Central School District budget. Tonight we're going to review the current proposed budget. The budget is scheduled to be adopted by the board in April and then voted on by the public in May. So we'll review what it looks like. We're going to review the proposed budget, look at the recent year's history for the district for both the budget amounts and the tax levy. We are going to review the tax cap calculation for the 23-24 budget, as well as the implications to the tax rate. We're going to review the projected state aid based on the governor's proposal and what's been included in the draft budget. We're going to share some information on the district's enrollment trend and review the expenditure categories included in the budget, as well as a fund balance projection, and then at the end if there's any questions or comments. So right now, projected revenues for 23-24 are $22,785,000. Projected expenditures are $24,233,000. That leaves a significant difference of $1,448,000. At this point, is being appropriated from fund balance to close that gap in the budget. Some key assumptions in the budget that we'll talk about a little more as we go through. We're looking at a 2.92% tax levy increase, which is an increase in the levy of $205,000. Currently in the budget, we have projected a 5% increase in our health insurance premiums. We're in the process of going back and forth with Excelis, negotiating the plan rates for next year right now, and we do not yet have final rates. And also, we're working on finalizing phase 2 of the capital project, and we anticipate having the final cost report for phase 2 filed by December of this year, which will generate some building aid in next year, which also is included in the budget. This chart simply reviews the last several years of budgets and how much they increased each year. The proposed budget for this year is a 5.98% increase. Proposed budget for next year is a 5.98% increase over this year's budget, which is $1,367,000. The tax levy is proposed at $7,230,000, which is, again, is a 2.92% or $205,000 increase over the current year. You'll see that both the budget increase and the tax levy increase are higher than they have been in recent years. This calculation is the tax cap calculation. We all hear about a 2% tax cap, but there are a number of factors that go into the tax cap in addition to the inflation factor, and the inflation factor is what is a maximum of 2%. And when you put in all the factors, your allowable levy increase can actually be more than 2%. When you go through the calculation, you take your prior year levy, you apply a tax-based growth factor that's assigned by New York State, include your pilots, and then capital exclusions, which items that we are levying debt to pay are excluded from the tax cap, and then that gets multiplied by the allowable levy growth factor. We deduct our pilots that we're anticipating for next year, and that gives us our limit before exclusions. You add in next year's capital exclusions, and you get to your allowable levy limit. So our calculated levy limit is $7,238,000, and our proposed levy is slightly less than that at $7,230,000. This just shows you the impact on a sample property. If you had a property valued at $150,000, our tax rate this year is $11.32 per thousand, equating to a school tax bill of approximately $1,698. And with this increase, next year's rate, assuming the total taxable assessed value stays the same, the bill would increase about $50 to $1,748. I put this slide in here just to show some interesting history. The district as a whole, which covers portions of several towns, has had an increase in its taxable assessed value over the last several years, which has caused the tax rate to decrease. So even though we're projecting an increase in the tax rate from next year compared to this year, if you compare it to some recent years, for example, 2021, our tax rate was $12.82 per thousand. But as our taxable value has increased, it's made the tax rate go down. So a property that had an unchanged assessed value from 2021 would actually pay $175 less in taxes next year than they did in 2021, based on the overall increase in assessed value across the district. This slide shows you various categories of state aid that we received. The first column is this year's budget. The second column is what we anticipate actually receiving this year. The third column is what was included in the executive budget, and the fourth column is what's included in our budget. The four categories that are highlighted in yellow are items where we budgeted differently than what was included in the governor's proposal. Excess cost aid is one of those categories. What is included in the executive budget is a 3-year average. So we looked more at what our excess costs for this year actually were that we would get aided on next year to get a better estimate. Building aid did not include phase 2 of the current project and the building aid on that. So when we anticipate filing that, we're able to increase our projected building aid to include that. Transportation aid is also an estimate based on our budget. There's a number of factors that go into transportation aid. One being our actual expenses. So very often in transportation, our budget is higher than our actual expenses, so our transportation aid ends up being less. And we're also finding that there's when they apply the amount of aid that we're gonna get on our expenses, we only get aided on our expenses based on aidable miles. So for example, regular route miles to bring kids to school, those are aidable miles. Athletic events, field trips, things like that, those are not aidable miles. So let's say you had 100,000 miles, 100,000 total miles, 90 of them were regular routes bringing kids to school, you'd get 90% of your expenses aided at our transportation aid ratio. And what we're finding since coming out of COVID is that now that we're having athletic events and field trips and things like that again, our aidable expenses are decreasing. So we're seeing a decrease in our transportation aid. BOCES aid is another number that we are projecting higher aid than what was included in the executive budget. There were some reporting issues with DCMO BOCES, and we felt that after working with DCMO after the executive budget came out, that this projection is a closer number. Overall, we're looking at a 1.8% increase in state aid comparing this year's budget to next year's budget. So when we've got a 2.92% increase in taxes and a 1.8% increase in state aid, our two major revenue sources, but our expenses are going up almost 6%, that's where we're running into the issue of having to appropriate additional fund balance to fund the budget. This chart simply shows the enrollment trend of the district over the last several years. In 2015, the enrollment was 1,012 students, and this year we're at 858 students. So that affects a lot of our aid calculations. So as our enrollment decreases, various categories of aid also are affected by that. This slide shows expense categories included in the budget. So the first column is this year's budget. The second column is this year's budget. The third column is the proposed budget for next year. And we're just dividing our expenses into various categories. So personal services is wages. It's the, what we pay all of our employees, bus drivers, teachers, administration, aides, everyone. That's projected to increase $574,000 or 6.3%. Equipment is increasing $25,000. And going down through each of the categories, it shows the breakout of where the increases are. The other categories are contractual, which is utilities, materials and supplies, all those sorts of things, diesel fuel. 0.49 is BOCES. We have a large expense to BOCES each year for the various services they provide. 0.8 is benefits. That's all of our health insurance, New York State retirement, Social Security that we pay on employees' wages. And then debt service and capital is our debt service payments on our bonds as well as our capital outlay projects. As you'll see on this slide, expenditures are increasing 1.3 million or 5.98%. We have found this year and continue to see in the budget projections for next year that special education costs based on the needs of the students that we have are significantly increasing. So this slide is the exact same as the prior one. And over on the right, I've just broken out some specific increases that we're seeing in special education. We added an 811 special education classroom at Townsend this year. that was not in the original budget, but we have this year and it's included in next year's budget. In addition, we hired 11 aides to serve our students, some on a one-on-one basis, some as a shared aide, and have included 3 additional spots in next year's budget. And then you have the benefits associated with those positions. We have additional placements or services that our special ed students are receiving through BOCES that's increasing the budget. So of the 1.3 million, about 800,000 of that is related specifically to special education needs and an increase in the needs of our population. This slide looks at our fund balance. When we started this year, our unassigned fund balance was 2.4 million. That's about 10.5% of this year's budget. We appropriated $580,000 to this year's budget. I don't anticipate we'll need to use that. This is the last year that we have some expenses that are budgeted in the general fund that we're actually able to fund through the COVID stimulus money. So that's really helping our budget this year, but this is the last year that that's going to occur. In addition to not needing to use that, I'm currently projecting that we might add $300,000 to fund balance. And then I'm subtracting out the funds that we'll need to put towards the Townsend floor project that's starting this summer. The actual expenses related to completing that project came in above the amount that we had projected when the capital project was voted on, so the board agreed to put some additional funds toward it. And then I'm also deducting the amount that is projected to be put towards next year's budget. So that means at the end of next school year, if the budget came out exactly as we planned, our fund balance would be 1.5 million, or about 6.3% of the budget. So going into the next year's budget, we wouldn't be able to again appropriate about $1.5 million because it would completely deplete our fund balance. The school budget vote is on the 16th from noon to 9 at the school bus garage. Voters will be voting on the budget. In addition, there's a separate proposition related to a 5-year lease of 3 65-passenger buses. We currently lease all our buses, and the leases rotate out on a 5-year rotation. So we'll have 3 that are being returned, and we'll be getting 3 new ones. As well as mentioned in the earlier meeting, the library budget is a separate proposition that's placed on our ballot to be voted on. There are also 2 seats for the Board of Education, a 3-year term ending June of 2026, currently held by Braden Dutcher, and a 3-year term also ending June of 2026, currently held by Paul Wood. If anyone is interested in running for the school board, petitions can be picked up at the district office and needs to be returned no later than 5 p.m. on Monday, April 17th. There's a lot of information in a short period of time. Does anybody have any questions?
I think it was very well presented.
Thank you.
Good job, thank you.
Questions?
You're all welcome to ask questions, for sure. It's community forum.
Last one. On the equipment, there was a $25,000 increase. That was for the highest increase percentage-wise. What is that?
It is one of the highest increases percentage-wise, but it is also one of the smallest dollar-wise. We have several things included in the budget next year. We have a truck. We had included a truck in this year's budget, a new one. There's been a lot of supply chain issues. We didn't end up buying a new truck. We found another piece of equipment that we thought was going to better service us with our new parking lot and things like that, and clearing the sidewalks. So we deferred the truck to next year and decided to look for a used truck. We don't put on a lot of miles and felt that that would better serve us. The second thing that's included in there is the piece of equipment that I mentioned that we bought is a Ventrac, which has a lot of attachments, and we've budgeted some funds to buy additional attachments that will help us maintain the athletic fields in a more efficient manner. And also, in this year's budget, we didn't budget funds for athletic equipment. We had been using COVID's stimulus funds to purchase athletic equipment, but we've had to put that back in the budget for next year. So those are the things that are included in there.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Meg.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, if there's any questions from anyone who's watching, please, send those to the board, send those to the district clerk, so we can address them.